right, let's get into episode 5 of Helstrom. This episode is titled Committed, and the synopsis reads that things aren't not what this seems as Mother's health sharply declines. As Anna searches for Yin, Gabriella offers counseling to a student struggling to understand how demons live among us. Daimon makes a discovery that is truly a matter of life and death. So there's a lot that's going on with this episode. Not as action-packed as episode 4 is still my favorite thus far. But there's a lot that goes on to this episode that really puts things into perspective. First of all, the opening scene is hella creepy. And then the score was really on point to really elevate it. But the opening scene, you don't instantly know, but then quickly, or soon after, you start to realize, like, this is actually the Helstrom family when they were kids. You see Daimon and his mom, and the mom really suffering with PTSD, shall I say, or some form of mental health with the absence of her daughter. And you kind of see how that put a ripple into the family. And you're thinking it's a flashback. But come to find out, Victoria has slipped into a coma. And while she's in this coma, she's reliving that night that she was taken away to the mental facility. Come to find out, too, she was committed because Damien called them on her. So she's reliving that day over and over. Not to mention she's being confronted now by the demon that possesses her. And that puts another thing into perspective, because now we actually see what that demon's actual true motive is. And not just what the motive is, but what it's scared of and what it's trying to prevent. So you see all of that that's happening, and it's throughout this entire episode. But at the same time, while she's in this coma, she's fighting for her life. So Luis and her staff is doing everything to try to keep her stable, because her body is just going, out of control right now because of the things that are happening while she's in this coma. But all at the same time, too, this brings the Helstrom siblings back to the hospital. And it's an emergency, obviously, because the mom's health is declining. But when they come near her room, they feel a source of power. And the source of power is the skull. And the crazy thing about it is that while Daimon has not ever seen the skull, Victoria touched it, and it affects both of them. So the fact of, like, why she feels it, he feels it too. And they feel it present, so they know it's somewhere in the facility, and they know that Chris Yin has something to do with it because he's been missing along with that when they went to San Francisco. So at this time now, you're seeing them truly doing a really extended search to figuring out where he's at and recovering the skull. But this brings about another problem, because Anna prioritizes her best friend Chris Yin, while Daimon prioritizes his mom. And we're going to see that come into play when it comes to the idea of rescuing the skull. What matters most? Because we know that Chris is possessed, and it's going to be a matter of protecting him, killing him. What is it going to be? And you see the two of them kind of have conflicting decisions on this, and ultimately trying to come up with what's going to be the best solution that they both can win with here. So you definitely have to see, and how that plays about. At the same time, Gabriella, who is a nun in training, well, she's actually going about things a little different. She's a nun in training, which means that she reports back to the church. Well, her and this student, she's trying to work with him in order to figure out, well, what's a better way to prevent people from being possessed, and in a matter of, like, I'm going to ask Daimon first over the church, or Damon's going to be the one to kind of make this right instead of the church. And I think that's because she's seeing things more. I mean, she tried to act like she doesn't seen it all, but like now she's seeing more and more like crazy things happen. And now she's realizing like the church may not be her answer. Not to mention what happened in the previous episode in the church is definitely not going to do good for her faith. So you're seeing her going about things in another way of saying, like, well, maybe the church way isn't working. I need to figure out another way that may do it. But the biggest things with this episode is we finally get to see a beam form of the one-eyed skull. Like, we get to see what it looks like, sort of, and it's, again, hella creepy. But ultimately, the conclusion of this episode really explains that, the mom being possessed and how being possessed by this being turned them against, her kids. And ultimately, how does this all connect to the skull? The conversation that they had truly explains it, as Victoria makes an appearance. Now, be clear, Victoria makes her first appearance in the series. So that all comes together. And then Gabriella has a confession with Daimon, and this goes back into the Bloods. The group but the group that Caretaker is a part of, and a little about Caretaker and his hotel thing that Luis knows about, but does Daimon know about? And again, Gabriella's a snitch. I mean, if you tell her anything, she's telling everybody. So after she told Luis, and Luis like, we already know, we go about things our way, and everybody goes about how to handle demons and possessions their own way. So it was no surprise to Luis that Caretaker and the Bloods, that's how they did theirs. But Daimon was the one that she wasn't totally sure about if he knew. And I think that's why she said, you know what, I need to tell you, because I feel like there's something really significant that's happening that can be a matter of life and death if you're not aware of it. So nonetheless, this episode did do a lot of explaining. It also explained, Daimon and Caretaker have a conversation, and Daimon talks about how Caretaker and the Blood, that group again, how for years and centuries they tried to kill their family, and Caretaker makes it very clear that he is not. He's trying to protect them, whatever means that means. We'll see. I mean, he seems to be very cordial with them, but I'm wondering why there's such a disagreement in that. We get to see Anna being absolutely hysterical this entire episode. She's so funny with her one-liners and her jokes. Definitely a couple of gems in this episode. We're seeing Chris still dealing with the possession. And then again, Victoria, who is really, struggling for her life, but to ultimately we see Victoria for the first time. And again, we get a little bit more of the explanation of the demon that possesses her and the relation to the skull, who is the greater power, who is basically their father and another being. And, what's the significance of the skull? Because the skull, again, is being used as it looks for energy. So the fact that it wants Victoria, because Victoria is a demon and it wants to have that power, is why it's feeding towards it. So the skull can contain the evil, and that's why they need it, because they want to pull. For one, because of the correlation to their dad, and two, because it can ultimately save Victoria. But it also could save Chris. But it's the matter of how, who first, and what. So you see a lot of that going on here. But episode 5 was really cool. I enjoyed this one. I'm so ready to get into episode 6, folks. So yes, stay tuned, because episode 6 review coming to you very soon.